So now looking more closely at how we classify under nutrition in kids. Again, I'm going to keep going over this because if you don't have this, you don't have kind of anything else. So you have wasting, BMI Z-score, body mass index Z-score less than -2, stunting, height for age Z-score less than -2. And we've talked about wasting, acute, stunting, chronic, and height. For preterm infants, a lot of my practice is with former preterm infants because they tend to have trouble feeding and growing. We tend to correct their growth for gestational age until 24 months of age. Formally, we're supposed to correct height until age 4, but in practice, we really usually just correct till age 2, and we hope that they'll catch up by age 2 for height as well. So you have protein, energy, malnutrition, you have chronic stunting, acute wasting, and then within wasting, you can see marasmus and kwashiorkor. And that's the kind of old way we talked about it. Now we think there's overlap. We're not using these terms as much as just kind of wasting and wasting with edema or without edema. So classification, I've talked about Z-score. Adequate is between -2 and 2 on kind of, you get a bell-shaped curve. Moderate is between -2 and -3 or less than 3rd percentile. Severely malnourished is a Z-score less than -3. And these, I see a lot of these kids here as well. And percentiles become unreliable, and that's where you really depend on Z-scores to be able to track change, because percentile is just going to remain like 0.01 to 0.02, and you don't know what to make of that. But if you can really see an improvement in Z-score, then that's very helpful. So acute malnutrition tends to be due to acute shortage of food, infection. It's reversible. Adults can become wasted as well as kids. And this is what we look at in emergencies. In terms of chronic, after chronic malnutrition, after a longer period of time, you end up with stunting. In children over 2, it's often irreversible, as we discussed, and you measure it by height. Adults obviously don't usually lose height. And it's very common to see in stable populations. So where I've worked, in Central America, we saw some acute, really severe malnutrition, but we saw a lot of really severe stunting from more moderate chronic malnutrition and infection. So this is marasmus or wasting. And it's associated typically with contaminated bottle feeding, depending on resources and hygiene resources. And you tend to see triangular face, skinny arms and legs, big belly. You can see rectal prolapse as well. Here's another picture from a WHO training module. Can you see ribs? Does skin look loose? Is flesh missing under the buttocks? Basically, there's no fat under the skin. And then kwashiorkor, we're not using that term so much as edema anymore, but basically when you have low protein or low albumin resulting in edema, and this is associated with severe immune deficiency and early death. This is even scarier than kind of this clinical picture when you start to get edema, hepatomegaly, anemia, lethargy. That's an emergency. So how do you distinguish the two? So this is length and this is height. Can you all see my arrow? I can't tell. So you can see this child is kind of gaining along until about 6 months, until solid food is introduced. Maybe at that point they get an infection or they're not getting the solids that they need, and the growth starts dropping off. And then you see a more subtle stunting process or dip in linear growth in response to this acute malnutrition from a weight perspective. If you can address this in time and get the child back up on the growth curve, as you can see here before age 2, you can see that height does respond nicely. So this is why it's so important to address things fast and distinguish this from other growth patterns as well. Like if you saw a drop in length first, you might think of more endocrine causes or things like that if height drops and then weight follows. So this is why I like Z-scores better than percentiles. You can see here you really don't have percentiles anymore, but you can still give a Z-score if you're really low in weight. weight for length, and you can kind of track it. Here, it's all severe. It's all in the severe category below -3, but this is probably -4 and -4.5, so you can track what's happening. And you also have arm circumference, especially if you're in an area where you don't have all the equipment to get a good weight and length. Arm circumference, you can also get Z-scores, and it's a pretty good marker of nutritional status, at least for wasting.